on
Looks
the,
like a pop-off valve of some kind.
Yeah, it's something to do with piping, right?
Well, it looks like it's spring-loaded pop-off.
Is it a pressure relief valve? Looks like something we have in the kitchen.
Yeah.
That like if
It
the
it looks like it's sheared off.
Yeah. So we have stuff like that in the kitchen, sewage water from back in the line, but they're bigger now, so maybe that's just an older.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's, I'm not sure, it's just weird.
You should be able to find out because it's got a name on it.
Yeah,
yeah, oh, see, we
I
don't.
go to their website.
I just, like, there's no,
It's drilled down.
there's no question on what district is what district.
Well, yeah, but it had to have sheared off because there's no threads on it.
Right, and that's rusted, so it's a fresh break.
But I mean, that's probably a spring in it.
Space districts.
I'd almost bet on it. And that's just a pop.
So is that same as natural?
And keep it from flowing. Sewer system?
Well, sewer or water, probably water because of ours, if it's pressure.
Yeah. Well, have fun in that search.
Right, Ralph?
Are we waiting for anybody? Okay.
Or weeks,
All right.
4 months, that went quick.
If everyone's ready, I will call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'll let you go first.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was just commenting to Cal, we're gonna have to get a bigger podium when it's not a commission up there. We'll work on that this winter.
Well, we're a friendly group.
That old one rolled over and one fell out kind of thing about to happen.
We're just gonna start a walking group and then we'll do it ourselves here.
Okay, could I have roll call, please?
McDonald,
Yes.
Bianski,
Yep.
Hauser,
Here.
Brown,
Here.
Pleasant,
Here.
Lisi,
Here.
and Gary. You have quorum.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 4, which is approve agenda. We have an agenda in front of us. If everyone has had a chance to review it, I'll open the floor for approval as presented, if there is no corrections or additions.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll support.
Okay. We have a motion and we have support. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right, item 5, public comments on agenda items only.
We're waiting.
Yeah, take a number.
Good job, guys.
Crushed it. Well, it appears we do not have anybody in attendance, so we will move on from public comments. Next item is approved minutes. We have 2 minutes to review and potentially approve tonight. First one is the March 11th Plan Commission meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at those?
So I think we need to amend the amendment.
What part?
It says, motion carries 4-1, but it should be 4-2.
Dude, I'm done with you guys. I will fix that and we approve as amended if you guys don't find anything else.
Anyways, that's it, yeah. Then I'll make the motion to, that said motion.
Thank you,
Yeah.
I'll support.
thank you.
All right, we have a motion and we have support to approve the minutes with a small amendment. Is there any other discussion? All right, with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right, those minutes are good with that amendment. Let's move on to April 8th, regular meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review those? All right. At this time, I'll open the floor for discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right. Item number 7, old business. We have currently no old business to review tonight. Okay, we'll move on to item 8, new business. We have our short-term rental discussion tonight. Rich is back. Welcome, Rich. Thank you. And our city manager, Tony, is here tonight.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Would you like to introduce?
Just kind of tee it up for you all. Thank you, sir, Mr. Chairman. Originally, we had Darwin Watson coming in, as well as Kristen Gunderson from the city of St. Joseph. New Buffalo ended up with a special planning commission meeting tonight, so Darwin couldn't make it. He'll come to your next meeting to kind of tell their experience there, so he'll be at the next one. But Kristen is here tonight, and before we go, she's a North County person. Kristen actually lives in Niles, so she's one of us from South County here, just as background. What I want to do, because both communities took a much different approach to short-term rentals and how they went about formulating their policies, their intent, their experiences, so we wanted to give you guys a little flavor of each. As you know, the city commission has put a moratorium on short-term rentals with the expectation of the planning commission crafting a recommendation for where we allow them in the community, how many we allow. So I think bringing in some other communities who have been through this conversation before is a good starting place for you guys, and it gives you an opportunity to ask some questions and hear from somebody who's been through this for several years and how they approach. City of St. Joseph took more of a pragmatic, let's go out, do community things and ease into it kind of approach, where New Buffalo went a open market and had to catch up with what the market was doing. So they really are two different approaches. They were done, and we wanted to hear from both of them and kind of take the best we can from everything to do our own approach that kind of meets Buchanan's needs. With that, I'll turn it over to Kristen because she knows way more about this than I do.
So, and I only know, I've been with the city of St. Joe for about 10 years now, so actually dating back to the 1970s, the city did regulate rentals of 1 month or longer. So if you had you were renting out your house for the year or signed a lease, we regulated those. We required a certificate for that, and we did inspections. In 2006, 2007, it's my understanding a lot by Silver Beach, that area below the bluff, a lot of neighbors started coming in and being like, we have all these parties going on every weekend. We have bachelorette parties, we have just craziness going on. So that's kind of how it got brought up to the city commission. It was back in 06, 07. And from there, they went through with the planning commission and to regulate it, came up with rules in the zoning ordinance, because it's a conditional use in the zoning ordinance. So I can approve all conditional uses if it meets all the requirements of the code. And then we also had to modify the code of ordinances to provide some other regulations that fall more under that and under the International Property Maintenance Code. Whoops, my pen just went.
I do that all the time.
So from there, they went through it all. They originally allowed them they went through and let people who could document that they were doing short-term rental with receipts, if they had papers from people who were providing services to them, cleaning or maintenance on the buildings, they allowed those to remain, and they're considered non-conforming. We probably have about 20 non-conforming short-term rentals in the city in the residential district. So in the zoning map originally, so when they finally got to their regulations in 08, 09, they allowed short-term rentals as a special use permit in any residential district. They turned 8 down, and then they decided, no, we're not doing this anymore. So the only place that you can do short-term rental in the city of St. Joseph as a conditional use is in this blue tealy color, and that's the Water Recreation District. In addition to the R3 multiple family, which is dark brown, and we don't have any in those districts. We have a condo complex at the very south end of town, and that condo association has said, no, we're not doing short-term rental. So we don't have any in there. So most, up until, I'd say, since probably 2020, most of them were non-conforming units in the residential district. Below the bluff, we have some on State Street, a couple that encroach farther into town. In addition, on the island, there's a residential detached development at the south end, and there's a handful in there too, and that's a gated community. And they do allow them, they go back and forth of we're gonna allow them, we're not gonna allow them. But since, if you're familiar with the city where the Inn at Harbor Shores is, across the river, there's a residential development immediately to the east of that called Harbor Village. And that's in the Water Recreation District. And when that came online, started coming online in 2020, 2021, it was always anticipated by the developer that part of that would be short-term rental. People would be buying them for short-term rental. So when it's all built out, there'll probably be about 100 units, and right now I'd say it's about a third short-term rental of what the housing stock is. So in that development, we have attached housing, like townhome looking things. We have, they call them U-courts, but they're townhomes. And then we have single-family detached homes. So it's a mix of housing, and people are buying them and renting them out. Now that HOA for that development has very strict rules, which we've learned about as time has gone on. Like they require you to notify the HOA before you rent to anybody. They only allow you to rent for 1 week at a time, whereas our code allows you to rent 1 night, 2 nights, 10 nights, however many nights you wanna rent. Our code allows you to do that, but they have specific rules in their HOA, and that's added some confusion because people thought that those were city rules, and they're not. And then they've gone back to the HOA and kinda complained. So I think as time goes on, in that district, in that neighborhood, we've already seen some people who weren't making the money they thought they were gonna make. They thought they'd be rented every week, and they're not rented every week, and because of the stipulation of weekly rental, it makes it more difficult for them. A lot of the older homes below the bluff, they don't do short-term rental during the winter months, it's only during the summer. So like from May until early October, and then they'll get a long-term renter in there for the remainder of the time if they can find one. So our program is you register, if you're a new unit, you register, you also need to apply for the conditional use permit. Right now, the fee to register is $100, the inspection is $85, and the conditional use permit is $100. So if you're brand new, it's $285, which is probably a lot less than I know South Haven has a pretty high number, dollar amount for their permit. We do inspections biannually, so we don't get a lot of complaints anymore. People know what's going on, and if we do, it's addressed through the public safety department. People are told you call the police department and they'll address it. So I think because the city took such an approach early on, that helped quite a bit, because I get phone calls probably 3 and 4 times a month. If a house comes online for sale for under $250, people think they wanna do short-term rental. And 99% of the answer is no, it's not allowed there. There's no exception, there's no variance, there's no special approval process. It's a no, it's not allowed in that district. You can amend the zoning ordinance if you wanna try to allow it there. We did change the rules last summer, or late 2023, early 2024, to allow short-term rental in our downtown district, but it's not allowed on the ground floor. And we've gotten probably about 9 units there. So one thing that's probably different with our ordinance compared to some of the other ones I've seen, we require a telephone line in the unit, and that's because you go some places and your cell phone as a visitor does not work. You get poor service. So we do require a telephone line in the building. Pretty much I think it says landline, but I'll say if it's hooked up to the cable, that's used too. And people comply with that because we do check that as part of the inspection process. We also require for short-term rental, and these rules are different than a regular rental unit. Short-term rental, you also have to have a fire extinguisher, which is different than regular rentals in our community. We also require, like when you go to a hotel, there's that map showing you how to get out of the building. You have to have a map like that for each sleeping room. We have an occupancy load, and it's based on the International Property Maintenance Code. So the first person requires 70 square feet in a room, and then you need 50 square feet for each additional person, and we cap it at 4 people per sleeping room. I think some people would probably say at this point, cause we have a couple houses, not many, but you can get 16 people in them, and some people would say that's too many. Another thing that our code does is the parking requirement. Just because you're a dwelling, we require 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, but if you're short-term rental, the first 3 sleeping room areas require 2 parking spaces, and then for each additional room, you need half a space. So to get that 5th to have a 5-bedroom short-term rental, you need 3 parking spaces. And so for a townhome, you don't have it, cause it has to be on your private property. It can't be in the parking lot next to the hotel, it can't be down the street, I can't rent it, it has to be on your private property. And a townhome does not have that space. So in this Harbor Village development, there are some the detached housing, there's been a couple units that were on the larger parcels that they were able to get a surface parking lot space next to the garage, off the alleyway. So, that's been accommodated for, and we allow that. We can't do retail sales out of the place. If you're having a party, we really don't want that either. And I think most of the landlords now don't, their lease is pretty clear, we're not a party house. We also require a copy of the lease, and there's certain stipulations within the lease of what has to be in it. You have to you just can't say it's Kristen from LLC, Kristen's LLC. It has to have a specific name and an address. It's not a P.O. box, it's a street address. Has to have an email, has to have a telephone number in the lease. So if something happens, the person can find you, whoever you rent it to. We also require, since we do have out-of-town property owners, they're called local agents. So local agents need to live within certain communities, St. Joe Charter Township, Benton Harbor, I don't know what the other ones are. Stevensville, not Baroda though. I think Baroda's out of it, or Bridgman's out of it. So there's a radius that they chose of you had to be within that area. So in case there is a problem, whoever's coming to service the building can get there in a timely fashion. And I think that's, some people will argue about that. Well, I'll be there, and it's like, well, if you live in, it's a 35-minute drive from me where I live in Niles to get to my office in St. Joe, and if it's a big problem, are you really gonna be that receptive to showing up? Whereas if you're closer, if the police are calling you, you're gonna get there a little quicker. So most people don't have a problem with that. I think we probably have a few that probably have a friend that lives in one of those towns, and they put down that name and phone number and hope for the best, and just say if someone calls you, just send them my way and I'll take care of it, or call me and I'll call them back, just to get around that rule. But so in our application, so we have 2 applications you have to complete: a rental registration and then the conditional use permit. We have a form for the local agent that they have to sign, understanding that they're responsible. So any bill that will go to them, or the renewal notice will go to them, because they are the local people. It does not go to an address in Illinois or Indiana. So I'd say for the most part it works out pretty well. I think it'll be interesting. Like I said, we're seeing people wanna buy it thinking they're gonna make a lot of money, and they really don't. In that particular neighborhood next to the hotel, those are starting at probably $450? $450 and up, plus your HOA fees. You gotta be making a lot of money to break even on it, and they're not making it because of the rules from the HOA. But I have a condo building by Clementine's, and there's 9 units in there, and they're all short-term rentals. I don't know, to me that'd be kind of weird, but, cause there's no one there, greeting you at the door. You just have the key code, and you have the pass to get into the enclosed garage. But it seems to work for them, and they sold fairly quickly. But that one you can easily walk to downtown. Most people wanna be within walking distance to the downtown. So we'll see how it goes. But in the D district, the area that's new, those units are not required to have any parking. So with our changes to our parking rules, if you're renting a short-term rental in downtown St. Joe starting Thursday, you will have to move your car to the free parking lot across the street and walk however far you're gonna have to walk, or you're gonna have to pay to park during the day. So that, I think, I've sat through other presentations, like I know Marquette did some rules probably before COVID, and they went to limiting the number of units they have, and they have radiuses, and St. Joe didn't do that. That's a lot of work. And how do you pick, we're only doing 20, or, whatever number you pick, and you have person number 31 who comes in the door, cause I was on vacation or I didn't know, and, it can be hard to say no to somebody. Or you get into a raffle situation, I've heard towns that do that. Or it's every year you have to renew, and if there's a limited number of certificates, well, you might get one year, but you don't get one next year. And that can be difficult because people are booking already for next year. If they know there's a week in May they wanna be there, or in early June, they're gonna book early, as soon as possible, as soon as the book is open. So if you're changing the rules, like South Haven changes the rules quite a bit, or they keep going back and looking at it, and, it'd be really difficult to run that type of business there, I think. But I think from what little I know, and you probably know a lot because of what you did, it's my understanding that they only, if you're a rental, you can do any kind of rental in South Haven. It's not short-term rental and long-term rental, it's any kind of rental, and they have different rules. I think their inspection fee is quite a bit higher.
Like
Their
over
permit
600,
fee is a lot higher, but they also have a full-time staff person doing it and checking things, and, with that number of inspections, St. Joe, and when people call and, well, why can't I do it there, and that's just bad and wrong. St. Joe made an effort to be a year-round community. We didn't wanna be like a New Buffalo, and I don't wanna pick on those towns, New Buffalo or South Haven. South Haven lost their hospital. St. Joe has a new hospital with a big, huge new addition in the last 5 years. So St. Joe is and they have a school system that's thriving, whereas those two other schools, or communities, their school system has changed quite a bit. I'll say that some of the units, especially, I just did 3 short-term rentals downtown above Jimmy John's, and they're all studio units, so those were probably $400 or $500 a month to rent, and they're gone now. So if you're looking at, or having concerns about where my worker is gonna live, we are losing some of that housing. And, that's just the way it's gonna go. And same with some of the houses coming in that, people think they can buy it at $250, they can use it on the weekends they wanna use it, and then rent it out rest of the time to pay the bills. They're not, $250 still is not really a market rate, it's not worker housing, but gets you in the door at least. And it's a house that needs a lot of work usually too in St. Joe. But I think it just, there's different ways to approach it, and, St. Joe made it real clear. And if you're the one who's answering the phone all the time and saying to someone, no, you're in an R1 district and it's not allowed there, you get used to it. Of why you can't do it, and you explain why, and most of them will finally go, oh, now I am,
What was your guys' why?
What?
What was your why? What was the problem you were solving? What was your why?
I-
What was your why? What are you telling? What's your why? What was the problem you were
Why?
solving?
Because we wanted to be a year-round community. We have a hospital, we have a school district that's thriving. We want people in the community year-round. We don't wanna see houses closed up all winter long. And we have a lot of that because we have a lot of second homes. But a lot of it's because we wanna be a year-round community. And we want people to have that experience. And a lot of the people, I think there's a fair amount of elected officials over the years and staff who grew up in the town, and they remember what it was like when they were a kid. The previous city manager would always tell his story about, I loved Halloween going below the bluff because the lots were all 33 feet wide and you could get a lot of candy in that, down the block. And he's like, there's no reason to go there now. If 2/3 of the homes are second homes, for short-term rentals, it's, you know, there's not many people that live down there year-round.
Well, they're gonna be second homes whether or not you allow them to be rentals or not.
Yeah, that, I mean,
anyway,
it's a
right?
problem anyways, and
Yeah,
there's
right.
nothing we can do about that,
Right.
but, you know, in regards to, you know, some might say you make it harder for someone to have a second home. Because they can't make income on it,
Right, so your intent
you
is
know,
to try to make it harder for.
and
people
that's
to-
part of it, but, you know, you also get, we have a few properties that are probably doing short-term rental under the table. You know, you can see a different car there every week. You know, there was one house I wrote a ticket for, first year or two I worked there on Ridgeway. And the story was that if you went, there was a sign in the front door, in the entryway, and it said, someone knocks here, you tell them you're my cousin, and you're borrowing the house. You're using it for the weekend. Don't ever tell anyone you're doing a rental. You're paying me to live here for the week. Because that's when you get caught and that's when you get in trouble. So our ordinance is written up, so if you cannot advertise unless you have a certificate. So I can write you a ticket for advertising, even though you're not, if I find you advertising, I give you a one warning. If you don't take it down, I keep a list of who I've sent those letters to, and if I catch you again, you're gonna get it's $1,000 ticket. And we go to court, we sit there, and I've had people who are like, well, I don't have $1,000. And the judge will be like, well, they make a payment plan out there, you'll have to figure it out. You know, or some people will go and, well, I'm just gonna have to charge it, I didn't think it was gonna be that much. But the ticket clearly states it's $1,000 minimum for the first offense, and it goes up to $2,500. So I think that helps too, to keep it down, and you know, I'll say that to some people if they get really snarky with me on the phone, you know what, if I catch you doing it, it's $1,000. And I think that helps people not do it, cause they get, you know, and I send out letters. You know, and most people go, oh, I didn't know, I thought it was okay, well, don't do it again.
Do you feel that some of these restrictions may prohibit investment in the community?
No, I personally don't think so. The Downtown Development Authority thought having short-term rental in that district would help grow the downtown area. I don't know if that's a true statement, if that's really what happens. You'll hear some people who will say, from everything I always learned in different places, is you need people living there. You know, it's not the weekend person who's gonna go to the restaurant, it's gonna be the person living there year-round, or going to the shops. And, you know, right now, we hear a lot, because we're going to Pay to Park on Thursday, and, you know, the visitors help a lot of those businesses along, but it's the year-round resident who really is the one who truly, in the end, helps those businesses along, who supports them year-round. And, you know, you might go in on vacation and buy a sweatshirt, but it might be the resident who's going in and buying gifts for Christmas for 5 people. So I think it'll be interesting as it goes along, how the businesses feel about it. You know, cause again, it's like you wanna be a community, you wanna see people you know when you walk down the street. And as you get more and more short-term rentals, if it's in the downtown district or in other areas, you lose that. And I think short-term rental in general, you know, from a lot of the articles I've seen is, you know, people are looking at it now, it's like, you know, all the other fees that Airbnb or VRBO puts on it, you know, some people are being like, I'm just gonna go to a hotel. You know, it's a lot easier, there's someone downstairs, they're gonna come clean my room every day or every other day. If I run out of towels, they're gonna bring me towels.
How many hotels do you guys have in St. Joe?
What?
How many hotels do you have?
We have the Boulevard Inn, which is on Lake Boulevard, the Silver Beach Hotel, which has been refurbished inside, and that's on Main Street. Across the river is the Inn at Harbor Shores. So those are the 3 within walking distance. There's one on the south end at like Hilltop and Lakeshore Drive, there's a Holiday Inn, and then there's an older, what is that one by McDonald's?
Oh, it's on Broadway, and I think. or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, and I don't,
And those are
I mean, it
all
looks
commercial,
clean,
yeah.
you know, it looks clean. You know, but it's a 2-story old hotel.
Like a
It-
motel?
You know, they might have more people who stay in that one in particular, who are doing outage work at the plant, you know,
So you have 4 or 5 hotels there.
yeah.
You're better off staying in a hotel and drive 15 miles into your destination anyhow, firsthand knowledge.
So we have-
What have you gotten into as far as the state, the homeowner, you know, as a homeowner, and, you know, I'm cringing here of all the regulations and all the fees that you're imposing on my personal property, you know. I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I'm learning a lot, but I still have a tough time with how hard Big Brother's infringing on my rights.
But if you look at the handout on this table on the first page, it's under, that use is listed as lodging and accommodations. It's not a residential use, it's a commercial use. You're using the property commercially. And if you go back a few more pages to page 7, where it talks about an excerpt out of our parking regulations. Short-term rental falls under commercial. So you have to look at it as it's a commercial use, it's not a residential use. Whereas if you're renting your house and you have a certificate to rent for monthly, a month at a time, that's a residential use. You're providing a residential dwelling to someone. You're not providing, yeah, and you're probably making some money on it, you know, to cover your costs and to keep it up and stuff, but the short-term rental was viewed more as a commercial use.
So how would that work in a roommate sense?
We don't, well, in regards to roommates, our code is pretty silent. If you wanna rent a room to someone you don't know, please don't call my office, because technically you can't do it. And I know people, well, because it's a lodging house then, or a lodging room, or a boarding house, and we don't allow boarding houses. So, you know, people will call and be like, well, I'm gonna rent it out, and I'm like, well, if I'm renting this house and there's 4 rooms in it, and if all 4 of you are on the lease, then it's fine. You know, because you're okay, but if you change it, cause you've all agreed to do it, if you go and start changing it where I'm gonna rent a single room out, or you're living there like what Airbnb originally started off as renting a room, it's still more income. You know, it's harder, if I see an ad, someone's just renting a room, you know, well, you don't have a rental certificate, you need a rental certificate. And if you're doing it for less than 1 month at a time, then it's typically not allowed. You know, it's harder to catch that one, and most people aren't gonna call if they're renting a room to, you know, a family, you know, your kid's friends. You know, if your kid rented a house and needed someone to help them pay the rent every month, you know, if you're all on the lease, it's fine.
I've had roommates all my life.
Yeah.
That's why I ask. And the original B&B, United States destroyed the B&B mentality. They destroyed it, because that's exactly what you're talking about. People had multiple rooms, you had a bathroom down the hall, you know, you got breakfast in the morning, you know, by the woman that owned the house usually.
And we have one bed and breakfast in town on Lakeshore Drive. We used to have 3 other ones, and they've all closed over time. And the one, he was on State Street, the Brick Road State Street, and he was very successful, and he's like, I can't do 30,000 steps a day anymore. I can't
Right.
do it, you know, to keep it clean and everything. So his permit, cause he needed a special use permit, and when he got his granted, he gave the stipulation offered up as part of the review process that if I'm done running this bed and breakfast, I cannot sell it as a bed and breakfast. You know, it was their family home, they had a lot of kids, a lot of foster kids in it, so it had already been set up to accommodate a lot of people. But when they went to sell it, he couldn't sell it as a bed and breakfast.
So is that the same with all of your non-conforming, your 20 that are not in the district?
No, for short-term rental, as long as the new owner registers within 10 days of closing, then they can maintain it. And it's really important for the people who are non-conforming to make sure they pay and renew on a timely basis, because we can revoke the permit and there's no process to get it back if you're non-conforming.
How about, did you guys give any consideration to just not assuming that everybody's a second homeowner and they're using it for just pure profit? And what about the homeowners that actually live in there, probably months out of the year and wanna rent it 4 weeks, or do you not allow that? I mean, isn't there a point where you could say, hey, you're obviously not an out-of-town investor that's doing
Yeah,
this, and you live here as a permanent resident, but then, I mean, people should be allowed, if they need to make a little extra money in a tough economy, to
Yeah,
rent
so it's
their
my
house out.
understanding, and I know more, so the assessing rules allow you to rent your house for two weeks out of a year without messing with your exemption for property
And do those
taxes.
people have to apply for your permit or not?
Yeah.
They do.
So, people might be doing that, I don't know. A couple of them I know who have non-conforming short-term rentals, I think that's what they do. Cause they wanna keep it, cause when they bought their house, they paid a premium for that short-term rental, knowing that they can't get it back. So they'll move out for 2 weeks or a week in a calendar year.
Well, I'm just talking about not one of the 20 non-conforming, just Bill who buys a house in R1 yellow and he lives there 11 months, but he wants to rent it out 3 weeks a year during Notre Dame
Yes,
weekends or something like that.
one thing we do say, if someone says, I have a regular rental, 1 month or longer, and if you pull up Airbnb or VRBO, you'll even find somewhere, it'll say, you'll go to check in for a week, and it'll say no minimum stay 30 days. So, and that's under a monthly rental certificate. What we tell people is, yeah, you can advertise it that way, but you cannot sublet so if I wanna rent this house, and I only wanna stay for 1 week, but I have to sign a 1 month lease, and I cannot sublet within that 1 month to someone else. So that's how some people are
if I wanted to rent out my house
thinking,
for
right?
Notre Dame weekend, I would have to rent it to that person for the month and tell them
They would have to sign a monthly lease, and no one else could stay there. So if they were just there for 3 days, no one else could be there for the rest of the time.
So you're still restricting.
And the thing about it is though, didn't you say you'd lose your homestead for doing that for a month anyhow?
Yeah,
So I mean, everything else is mute. If you lose your homestead,
Your homestead wouldn't
No.
fall off just because you rented your property.
It's commercial property.
No, it's not rezoned as commercial property, it's considered commercial use, but
Well, I
it's still
think,
residential.
Chris, can I come back to something
Yeah.
just further? You touched on St. Joseph considers short-term rentals a commercial use, not a
Yeah.
residential.
correct.
That is not just a St. Joseph ruling, correct? The state courts have actually ruled, just for you guys as you're doing this, that short-term rentals are a commercial use, not a residential use. So you really
It's
need to
still
keep that in
being
your
fought-
mind.
It's still
The
being
use has
fought in
been,
the Supreme
the use
Court.
has been deemed by the courts in the state of Michigan as a commercial use when you're doing short-term rentals.
So my argument with that would be, and COVID kind of triggered this, is home occupation. So to me, that's a commercial use. So if that's allowed in your R1 and you're considering short-term rentals commercial.
Yeah, cause we allow daycares, we allow all these other commercial use
Well,
properties in our
we
one
made the
district.
exception that if you're renting your house and you're not living there,
And nobody's come after you for targeting or blockbusting and nothing like that, I mean,
I think that's just how the community chose to do it. You can't have a house and run a daycare and go home every night and sleep somewhere else. It's not a home occupation then.
there's
It's-
a list of other things that people do as
You know,
commercial use.
I think, so what also the city did back in '07 and '08, they had a special rule because that's when the senior PGA was being played. And you could come in, apply for a permit that was like, I think it required a special use permit, and it would only be good for that week of the senior PGA or the 3 weeks around the senior PGA. And so a couple people did it the first year or two, whenever it happened, and no one rented them. So it was like, well, I'm not gonna spend $600 to go through this process. It might be different, cause you guys are a lot closer to Notre Dame. If you had a weekend one, call it something differently. If you were that concerned about trying to get Notre Dame people here, and I know we get some up there, but probably not like, it's still, it's 40 minutes away, that's, after a long day, that's kind of a long drive at that point,
Yeah, you
got
get to
home
Notre Dame in
basically.
20 minutes from
Yeah.
here.
And I think you do, and Niles has them on Barron Lake that, they rent them out in the fall for Notre Dame games.
Right.
I think it's just, you could probably have 2 different levels. A regular short-term rental and then maybe a weekend one, and they have different
And
requirements.
cap it out at like 30 days a year because if you had 3 weekends, that's 9 days. And usually
Yeah.
Notre Dame has 6 home games, so you're talking about 18 days or something.
You know, cause you gotta
21
move
days
out,
maybe.
you know, there's certain expectations, you know, and depending on who your cleaning people are, or, you know, if you're going through an agency to do all the maintenance or cleaning, you know, I've heard stories of, you buy brand new white towels every year. That's the only tiny towel you have in the house, is a white towel. You know, there's specific rules and you have to lock up all your stuff. So people doing it really for like a weekend in a regular dwelling unit, you know, there's probably people doing it. But you know, I have acquaintances who, you know, went through a divorce, had a house in South Haven, and they moved out during the summer months so they could pay the mortgage, because they couldn't, but they had to get all of that stuff.
Well, I'm saying that could happen too. Somebody buys a house here in Buchanan, a year later loses their job, they're gonna have to relocate, and now we're telling them, sorry, you
Yeah.
can't
Or-
make any money off of your
The thing
apartment.
about it is I appreciate all this, but we're getting way away from, I mean, we're trying to get educated by what they've done. And we're not, I don't wanna beat, I feel we're trying to beat up on her.
Well, no, I'm just
I
asking
mean, and
questions as
you know, I
to,
mean,
like-
that's the way it's coming across to me. I want her to teach us. And what I wanna know, did you grandfather your bed and breakfasts in that you already had?
The bed and breakfasts, they all had received a special use permit, so they were fine. One of them came in and put in writing they no longer wanted to be a bed and breakfast, so they cannot go back to be a bed and breakfast. They had a special use permit, and they revoked their special use permit on their own.
So all of that was, you know, when you initiated this, you had all of that. I mean, I have a tough time with all this regulation, and
Yeah.
Matt obviously does too. But, and I'm trying to get my head wrapped around how we should write this for the city of Buchanan, cause we're way ahead of it. I mean, we're way ahead of the curve on this, so we could be, not lax would be the word, but more open to, because it's not cheap. People think
Okay.
it's not cheap. And then when they say, you know, you gotta get this much, you're not gonna rent it 365 days a year. And you have to have a maid there doing you know, and even if you don't, she has to go in there when they leave, and you have to clean it up. And if you allow pets, you don't dare allow people without their freaking pets, you know?
One of my coworkers, she used to have one on one of the sister lakes, and she said, you know, a lot of people will state the lease will say, you have to list every name that's gonna be in there. She said, so that's what her lease had, and so she showed up on the day to give the keys, or they called because something was wrong, so she shows up and she's like, there's supposed to be 5 people here, and I'm counting 6. Well, they decided to bring grandma along. Well, grandma slipped and fell because it was raining outside, and now they're mad at her because grandma slipped and fell. Well, grandma was never on the lease. Grandma should have never been there. So a lot of it also then gets into, and this is the operator's issue, is how many people are gonna be there, and are you only gonna allow the people on the lease to be there? Because that gets back into your parties that happen, cause you don't want a bunch of parties, you want people, you know, do you allow parking on the street overnight?
No.
So, if you have a house that has that can hold 16 people, and your driveway only holds 2 cars, there's a problem. I mean, you're not all driving a big van loaded up with 8 people each. So I think the biggest thing I would probably look at is parking. You know, if that's gonna be a concern, or if you're gonna be amenable to parking on the street, or if you have lots set aside where someone can park overnight. Parking would be a concern. How you regulate, you know, I included in the building, in our code of ordinances, chapter, I think it's 8, some excerpts out of that about how we regulate them. We require, and I've never asked for this, it's just something that's there. They're supposed to, the group is supposed to keep a list of everyone they rent to. So if there is an issue, I could go back and look. I've never gone and asked. I mean, we have other things to do, but, you know, that gets back to operating a business where if something happened, you had those records. And it's different now too because of the internet. You know, back in 06 and 07, you know, if they weren't getting them on the internet, they were finding them in the newspaper or through word of mouth. You know, cottages to rent, and you know, I think that's part of it. But I think it's just having rules, so we also have this how to be a good neighbor type of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that good neighbor policy. I've seen that on some of the other communities.
Yeah, and you know, it basically just says, here's our rules about hours of being quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think that's important.
we get complaints once in a while about people shooting off fireworks. You know, there probably should be something in there about that, but it hasn't been updated. And again, we just, if the neighbor calls and complains, you know, on Monday morning, I'm like, well, I can't solve your problem Monday morning.
Yeah, it's gotta be then and
You need to
now.
call, if it happens again, you call the police when it happens.
Yeah.
Cause you have to do it right when it's happening, so a lot of it's educating that, you know, I think one of the peninsulas up by Traverse City, they have a lot of strict rules. Grand Haven, I think, has gone through some rules recently. You know, it's a lot about what the community really finds acceptable. You know, and it's changing. You know, people, my planning commission consists of 9 members. 5 of them have been on for more than 5 years. One of them's been on for 35 years. And when I brought that the DDA and the
Yeah,
city
we have
commission-
one old duffer on our,
Yeah.
on
And
Been on here 95.
And when the city commission and the DDA asked the planning commission to look at short-term rental in the D district, there were 5 gasps. Like, are you kidding me?
our.
Because if it would have been under a different board, that would have never been a discussion.
Yeah.
But it's how things have changed.
So I have a question, just, let's say I'm a forest fire officer and I could be shipped to California and I need someone to watch my house, I'll be gone for 3 weeks, I'd have to apply for a month rental.
I would
Not
say
knowing
no,
when I
or
would
like
come
a
back.
dog sitter that lives in your house, pet sitter.
Or
I mean,
something
we
like
haven't
that,
gotten
or-
that far, we haven't done that.
Or travel nursing that will come into service and then you're looking
No,
at,
we haven't regulated it to that extent.
okay.
And Christian, I wanna be clear that we appreciate your time.
Yeah, oh yeah, no,
being
that's
here.
fine.
Yeah, I was just asking questions,
No,
I
you're
wasn't
fine,
trying to be
you're
argumentative.
I think these are questions that, you know, we might get from the public.
And I think to know
Just
your
kinda
why
looking for
is
answers,
one of the
but-
most important.
And we're all learning.
Yeah,
yes.
and I would really look at, if you want a totally random, different one, look at Marquette's, cause that gets into a bunch of calculations and they map them out and, you know,
Well, we
and
don't
then
wanna be
that's a lot of
complicated.
work.
Yeah, we
you
don't
know,
wanna.
that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You know, but in St. Joe, the residents did not want these all over the place. And even now you hear it, you know, if we went to if, let's say, someone said, well, we should allow these in the R1 district, it wouldn't go very well. Because a lot of the neighbors still remember that, thank you, still remember what it was like when they ran, you know, the few that were there, had the parties, you know.
Even with that good
garbage
neighbor,
on
or good neighbor
streets.
policies,
Yeah.
I mean, you still
You
think
know,
that's a problem, huh?
Yeah, they don't wanna see that, and you hear now, even during the summer, you know, a lot of people complain about Silver Beach. And the people who go and use Silver Beach, and it's like, well, it's a beach, you bought near a beach.
Yeah.
What you think was gonna, I mean, you can't say that in a meeting,
Right.
but you can go, you have to be a little tolerant during the summer, but, you know, there's some that live down there who would, if you could have a gate and have a toll and only the people who live there could get in, they would want that. But that's not how it is.
So you guys, we talked about this, when you have unruly Airbnbs that are consistently, whatever, unruly, you have the ability to revoke their permit, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and, I mean, fine them, do you fine them too? Do you just revoke their permit, or?
You know, I mean, we get some, I'd say for the most part, we don't get complaints on them. You know, on the ones that have permits. It's the ones that are, like, I have one, I didn't get complaints last year, but we all know they're doing short-term rental. They live in a western suburb of Chicago. There's a different car there every weekend. There was one weekend I was in St. Joe doing something, and we're driving down the road, and here comes the guy with the suitcase. I said to my boyfriend, I said, stop. Roll down your window and just play stupid and say, hey, did you rent that? We're looking for a place to rent, you know, later on this summer. And the guy said, yeah. You know, and I mean, I could have called the police, but I'm like, you know, and I wrote the people another rude letter saying, people have told me they are renting this from you. You need to stop. But it's hard to catch them. Now, there's programs, different software packages and companies that, I don't know where they go looking, but they can find more short-term rentals that you won't even know about. Now, we search, have you had any of those call you that wanna do that work?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell because like, St. Joe, if you type in the zip code, well, that picks up, part of St. Joe Charter Township, Shoreham, that area's a lot bigger and, you won't give me the list so I can check to see who's missing and who's not. But there's companies that do that, they'll take care of all the complaints, they'll send out all the notices. We haven't gone down that road yet, cause we really don't have that many.
Well, as you know, Buchanan is small town USA,
Yeah.
and we certainly don't have very many at this point. I think it's less than 15, is that right?
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah. So, and as Dan mentioned, we're kind of ahead of the curve a little bit, but that's good.
And the reason, just the thing we looked at this is, we saw it happen in Three Oaks, we're the next town down US 12, so let's have a conversation now and be proactive versus reacting to what's happening.
Yeah, well, as this board, I think we want to be fair and comprehensive in our ordinances, so.
The phone, I get a lot of concerns when I tell someone new that they have to, cause people will call, okay, I'm gonna fill out the paperwork, what do I need? We always say, well, make sure your phone's working before we get there, cause otherwise you're gonna fail. And, well, why do I need a phone? Well, and you have to have an answer, and the answer is, you're visiting someplace, you don't know if your cell phone will work there. The people below the bluff, I have 2 planning commission members who tell me they have Verizon and they think there's someone in the neighborhood who blocks Verizon phone calls. Because there's no cell phone service for Verizon. Where I go and vacation on occasionally in the UP, AT&T doesn't work there, so if you're in the house and you're having a medical emergency, you're not in a hotel, you can't call downstairs, you can't run downstairs and find someone to help you.
Right.
You're gonna be out on the street hoping someone helps you. I haven't seen other ordinances that require a phone. And like I said, I think when it first started, it had to be like a true landline. I'd say as long as it's plugged into the wall out, I wouldn't know the difference.
Right.
We're getting calls now, every once in a while we'll get a call, well, can I have a short-term rental on a boat? Well, can you get a phone on a boat that's not a cell phone?
It's unlikely.
If you can do that, or if you wanna change the rules, here's the rules, go in, look at them, and see what needs to be changed. And no one's come forward to change them. And I know South Haven and Saugatuck have spent more time regarding boat short-term rentals than St. Joe has.
I would just tell you, I got a satellite phone.
And I mean,
A shoe phone.
and I have some marinas, like I have one marina, they build little houseboats and they bring them to South Haven, cause they own a marina there, I think, and they rent them out there, and I've gone and toured them, they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't wanna stay there for a whole week, cause they're small, but, for a weekend, yeah, I'd probably do that, but it's $700 a night, well,
Get pricey.
for me, I'd rather spend my money for something else, but people do it and they, it's a cool little experience. And they have their own issues and I've just followed it a little to see that, they're looking at it. I think Saugatuck was upset because of their river, more of them were parked along the river, which was blocking views of the river then.
Right.
And that's what, I don't know what happened with those.
They're still there, but I don't know if they're using them for short-term or
Yeah.
long-term.
So I think it's changing a lot. It's changed a lot in the 10 years I've worked on it. And I think people became more open to it, but now I'm thinking, it seems like people are beginning to see the negatives to it in regards to owning and operating them. It's not the cash cow.
Not as profitable as they once thought, yeah.
So how much time are you the only person in your department? How much time do you devote to short-term rentals in St. Joe?
Okay, so if you renew your license, that's all through the building department, so I'm not really involved in that. I will go on the initial inspection for a new unit, to make sure it all complies and I kinda know what's going on, because I review the conditional use permit. And I'd say between writing up the conditional use permit and doing the inspection, that's about 2 hours. Last year, I probably did 20 short-term rentals. And that's because of the one neighborhood and the stuff downtown. If it wasn't for those two, we wouldn't have any. In regards to looking for them online, I go in spurts now. You know, there might be a day I'm feeling lucky and I can catch 3 or 4 people.
That's really how you police it though, right? I mean, if they don't advertise, you don't know about it, right?
Yeah, and those, I mean, you'll never really catch those. I mean,
Yeah.
a couple I've caught, you know, they were advertising, they didn't have a permit, they had received a notice before, the property hadn't changed ownership, they've been told, they knew the rules, they chose to ignore the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you can't feel sorry for them. I mean, yeah, $1,000 hurts, but
That's a lot of money.
you were told. And people will ask, well, can I do this? Can I get a variance? We don't grant use variances in the city of St. Joe. You can't get a special use permit. You know, the answer is no. You know, if you wanna do short-term rental, then there's other communities that allow it in a lot more places than what we do.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and for a while, down below the bluff, there were 2 or 3 properties that were for sale. You know, and they were 3 units. You could have 3 units of short-term rental. And people, you know, finally bought them, and there's another one, it's one piece of property, it's got 4 dwelling units on it. 4 standalone houses, and 3 of them had short-term rental certificates, and that took probably 5 years to sell that property.
Wow.
You know, so I think the ones like in Harbor Village on the north side of the river, I think as time goes on, you know, it's gonna stabilize and people are gonna unload them. You know, you might do it for a year thinking you're gonna make some money, but the rules, the HOA rules are what's really stifling that.
Well, the market dictates pretty much everything in
Yeah.
real estate, right? So,
But, you know, whenever the state starts talking about changing the rules, we're there, we're watching. You know, we're gonna object to, oh, we're gonna take it off, the state's gonna be in charge of it all. We show up objecting, cause we don't want that. The legislation that was active last year, that I think, who did that? Andrews?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was Joey, and a couple
Joe,
of,
yeah, he came up with worked with whoever with one, and that was fairly good. You know, and we didn't, because it still left the control at the city's level. And that's probably where you really need to be most concerned about, is if it comes back out and it's like, we're gonna take control away from the city if you don't have a rule, and the state says you can do it wherever you wanna do it, you know, that's where, you know, communities need to be concerned about, is, you know, if it goes back down that road. And, you know, I think MML watches it pretty good, the Michigan Municipal League, to see what's going on, and they've tried their best, and, you know, but in a lame duck session, anything can happen, and, you know, they got close a couple of times, and it didn't happen.
well,
Yeah.
my hope is we have some control
Yeah.
with balance and of course include fairness, so.
So I got one last question. So in your administrative process, so are the surrounding properties made aware that this is going
No.
to be something that's going to happen, and or have any, and they don't have any options to say,
Um,
I don't want this?
Under our current rules, no. And now, if you were in an R3 district, which is a multiple family district, and you were adjacent to a residentially zoned piece of property, then you'd get notified because it's a special use permit. So Corwell builds an apartment complex at the south end of town on Lakeshore Drive on some property they owned, and I caught someone there doing short-term rental, and I sent the tenant, I didn't know what tenant, I must have called the people I deal with from the hospital for the apartment complex, and I said, you know, cause you can only find so much information on the VRBO website. And I said, this is the person's name, this is what it says, here's some pictures, and they're like, are you kidding me? Someone's trying to rent it out for short-term rental? And I said, yeah. Oh, no, we'll take care of that. And then the next apartment complex farther north, same thing. I said, it's a corner unit because you can tell by the pictures. It overlooks the lake, and they're like, oh, I know who it is, I will take care of it, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
You know, so we've never had, I haven't processed one where a neighbor was notified. You know, there's some communities that do require that, ours does not. You know, simply because like in the water district, you know, going into it, you can do short-term rental, and
Right.
you need to expect that. Now, I'd say in that neighborhood, Harbor Village, and then the one out on the island, they both have a private pool, the HOA does, and I've heard people complain about the short-term rental people
Right.
at the pool, but that's not ours.
Right. That's not
You
your
know,
problem.
that's-
Yeah.
You guys need to police that, we're not gonna police that for
Right.
you.
Right.
But, you know, probably, you know, to limit the impact on your neighbors, it'd probably be, you know, a cap on how many people can be in a building. You know, if you have a really big house,
Yeah, and you mentioned parking. That's a
And
big
parking.
thing. Yeah.
you know, to me, I think those are probably the big, and not changing the exterior of the building so it looks not like a dwelling unit.
And I really liked some of the good neighbor policies that I read. I think that's
Yeah.
that's important too, because that can be enforced very easily, I would think.
So, and we don't allow people to sleep in the basement,
Yeah.
even if there's an, escape window, an egress window, you can't sleep in the basement,
Okay.
so.
All right. Well, again, Kristen, we do appreciate your
Oh,
insight.
no problem.
We do.
I brought some other copies of the conditional use application that they fill out, and those questions that are also in the packet on page 3. Well, that talks about bed and breakfast, but on page 4, the highlighted stuff, 4, 5, and 6, because we have conditional use permit for the water district, conditional use permit for the R3 district, a special use permit in the R3 district if you're adjacent to residential, and then a conditional use permit in the D district. And they all have a couple of different rules. For the most part, they're all the same. But you can look at that, and then I brought the rental registration for one, if you did a monthly lease or a short-term rental, if you wanted to see that. And then our website has some information, that's where you can find that handout. And then we have some other handouts, like what the inspection looks like, so people understand what we're looking for. We require, smoke detectors and CO2 detectors. You know, but I think it's good probably to have what we're beginning to hear now too, is a lot of them require, your insurance company wants you to have those, more of the CO2 detectors in the unit, and then they also want more fire extinguishers.
Right.
Whereas we only require one, but a couple of inspections we've been on, they've said, oh, no, he told us we had to have one on each floor and in the garage, you know, in quite a few places, just in case.
Yeah, I think the safety requirements would
Yeah,
be real
'cause,
important.
you know, none of these units are sprinkled, so, you know,
Right.
it's, you know, they're pretty,
Well, again, thank you very much.
yeah, no problem. Good luck.
Yes, thank you.
You guys got a lot of work ahead of you.
Yes.
Appreciate you leaving that information.
Yeah. But I would try Marquette's got a weird one. South Haven, whatever they're doing.
I get January, it's by the week, it's hard to benchmark them.
And, yeah, and it changes every year.
You've been through some commission.
I'll just order.
Yeah,
Okay.
right, could be good, thank you.
Thank you. Well,
Thank
good
you,
luck.
Randy.
Thank you.
You guys can walk around.
Okay, thanks.
All right, continuing with new business, we'll move on to on-street parking discussion. Is that-
This had actually had come up in the last commission meeting.
Okay,
This is
all right.
something they'd asked to kick down to you guys, not for any action tonight or
Okay.
in-depth conversation is, while you're redoing the zoning ordinance, if you guys want to look at the parking, do you want to allow on-street parking overnight? If you do, is it seasonal, is it every other night? So just as part of the zoning conversation, the request had come for you guys to look at parking. You don't have to change it, but revisit it maybe as part of that.
And you included the current version.
Yes, that was in there.
Okay.
So our current doesn't allow anything. A lot of what other communities allow that I've worked in before is kind of what I call the most common approach. It allows on-street, generally not between mid-December and mid-March for snow season, and then outside of that time frame, every other side of the street odd number of days on the odd side, number side of the street, even number of days on the even side. If you're gonna allow on-street parking, that's what I would call the typical approach most communities take.
Okay.
Again, not looking for any action from you guys, but to start you thinking about that, if that's something you wanna change in the zoning ordinance as you're redoing that
I've
stuff.
got enough tickets to definitely wanna change.
Well, one thing we talked about
That's
before is that
ridiculous.
we're encouraging more people to live downtown, right?
Right, so all that sort of
Upper
stuff.
story residential.
That's correct.
So if you're looking to build capacity, the easiest way is to look at on-street.
Yeah, we're not a metropolis with parking problems, like, if you own a house, you should be allowed to.
Yeah, we just have narrow streets, so we gotta manage how on-street.
You're right, they are
works, and it's
narrow,
something you
but
wanna
yeah,
allow.
one-sided parking's probably a decent answer for that.
Yeah, so something for you guys to keep in mind, put on a future agenda or address as you're doing the zoning ordinance update.
So again, we'll review the policy as it stands and then add some comments for our little bit of homework.
Yeah, and I just wanna talk about the short-term rental. I don't want you guys to think I'm against short-term rental, I use them all the time, as a matter of fact. I just wanna make sure as a community, we have a conversation about it before we
Mhm.
decide what we're gonna do. And I believe in property rights, but it's things like, okay, if we lose 50 houses, and if you assume 1.5 kids per house at $10,000 per kid, that's a $750,000 hit to the school system.
Right.
So I just think it's a planning commission, you guys need to have kind of a holistic conversation and figure out where that sweet spot is you wanna try to hit.
Yeah, cause there's a lot of moving parts. in there.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think keep in mind, you can always expand it, but once you allow it everywhere, you can never retract it.
Well, we have to have special use permits for home businesses, for like that we should be able to do the same thing, you're trying to.
Home occupation,
Home occupation,
yeah, that was my point, yeah.
You're making money on it, it's no longer your residence,
I
it's your
agree with
business.
a lot of it too, making money for the city, the permit thing, the main issue I have as a realtor is homeowner rights, and to be able to tell somebody what they can and can't do with their own properties. I think if we can put a cap on it, like we talked about, if someone wants to do that, when they can only do it for 18 days or something out of a year, because my opinion is St. Joseph and New Buffalo is apples and oranges. New Buffalo's 47% second homes and vacation homes. We're not that, and as St. Joe, you know what I mean?
Don't disagree with that at all. I think what I'm talking about is we need to look 5 years down the road, and if you look how that second home market and that short-term market is pushed off the coast, and it has up and
No,
down.
yeah, they've migrated out.
Yeah, we're not doing this for what we're seeing now,
Sure.
we're doing this policy for where we see this community in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I said it earlier, this is small town America, this isn't St. Joe or New Buffalo.
We don't have lakefront property.
No.
Right.
New Buffalo's had the problem for 75 years, you know, but I think, Tony and I have talked about it a lot. It's doing something actually before we need to do it.
Yeah, and I
No.
appreciate being proactive. And
Yeah.
I did question the sense of urgency, and I was gonna bring that up about, you know, we tried to put this special meeting together for the 22nd, nobody could really make it. We had already canceled our meeting for this month, and then somehow it got brought back up, and this meeting got moved from the 22nd to the 15th. And part of me just feels like it's being pushed on us in a way, or there's some kind of sense of urgency I'm not
Oh,
seeing.
that's fair.
Like, and I appreciate proactiveness, but twice in these thread of emails, Rich or whoever was asked, why are we doing this? Is there a reason why we can't do this? And it was never.
Yeah, and I can address that, and that's me on the schedule. We put an 8-month moratorium on it, and I don't want you guys rushing at month 7, trying to come up with a policy. That's all. I
Okay.
wanna make sure we don't.
And that's
keep
fair,
pacing on-
again, I'm
yeah.
all about being proactive. It's just,
Exactly.
to me, sometimes it just seems.
Yeah, I just don't want you guys to feel forced to hurry up and
What
finish
is our
this
why?
issue up.
What is our why about? We have so many other things that we're working on or up in the air now. What's our why behind pushing this?
Just because we are starting to see people listing homes in this community for specific short-term rentals. When we
Right.
put this moratorium in place, we had several phone calls of people upset, well, I just bought one house, I was gonna buy another for a short-term rental. That's the why.
And
We
I'm
are-
okay with preventing that. I'm just not okay with preventing people that, again, might wanna rent out for Notre Dame weekend or might wanna rent out for wine country a couple weekends out of the
Well,
summer or
that's your
something.
opportunity.
We
You
should
can put
be allowed
a,
to do that.
and I think there's a difference between leasing out for 18 days a year and leasing out every weekend or being empty. And that's the conversation we need to have. I don't think there's any heartburn on that,
Yeah.
kind of what you're talking. I think there's some heartburn on, we lose a single-family house in one of our residential neighborhoods that is now rented half the year and half the year sits empty. And it underscores our sense of community.
Well, yeah, fortunately, our taxes are high enough that people, it's not lucrative, like she was saying, for people to necessarily have them as full-time Airbnbs because they're gonna have to pay $5,000 a year taxes on top of whatever else
Right.
that they have to pay, so.
I did want to bring up the point though
Go
too.
ahead, Ben.
was partially my fault when the emails, I completely forgot that we had canceled this meeting. I had completely forgot it. So I thought it was an emergency meeting. So when I reached out to Tony about it, when I first read the email, because I was kind of caught off guard too. And then I didn't remember till after we said, Tony decided, well, I helped him decide, if we're gonna have a meeting in May, have it on a regular scheduled night. And that's how that all come about. The email threw us all off guard. And I do apologize for not remembering, otherwise I'd have said the meeting for May was canceled. But I completely forgot that it had been canceled.
Well, I think it's okay that we met. I mean, it's a regular meeting, so I think, and I think it's good that we're working on this, so. All right, anything else? We're gonna move forward. With public comment, non-agenda items, we have, again, no public present. Let's move on to Community Development Director comments.
I would just, say that, on the zoning project update, Emma had a very detailed call with Susan Henderson from Peacemakers today. As we continue to hone and finalize draft 3 of the zoning ordinance, and I provided detailed notes to you guys.
Yeah, we received that summary, thank you.
On what was discussed and next steps, so that you can review and understand that staff is working diligently to get this document ready for your review. That's all I have.
Thank you, Rich, and again, welcome back.
Hey, it looks tanner and more relaxed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you got a nice tan going on there, buddy. All right, commissioner comments, we'll start down here again, Jen.
All right, well, I appreciate that discussion, she was very thorough, that was very helpful, I think, just to get a point of reference on what someone else is doing and the ways that they're addressing some of the issues that have come up. It was really helpful to hear all of her points that she made, so that was great, appreciate it. Good discussion on the end.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I also appreciate it. I wasn't trying to grill her or anything. It's just, I like to know people's whys and I like to know what their motivation is for what they're doing, what they're doing. Tree Friends, I believe they met and picked out all the trees that
Tomorrow
are.
night.
Oh.
They're at the agenda tomorrow. They have the list to choose from.
Oh, cause we had a meeting.
Oh,
on
you met, but
Sunday.
I've not
Yeah,
got the list
I
from
wasn't
you guys.
at the meeting on Saturday, but I know they had pretty much finalized it, and then tomorrow I think we're gonna vote on the actual
And I'll be at your meeting tomorrow.
trees that are gonna ground.
I know you guys met, but I'm
Just
not.
so you know, every week at our status meetings, it comes up about getting the final recommendations.
Oh, jeez.
And my name is assigned to it, so I'm waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's all I got.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Mr. Hauser.
Well, yeah, I do appreciate this. It was very constructive. So I will forewarn everybody that next meeting, I get to give you guys a 20-minute presentation as I'm trying to go on to become a master citizen planner. So I did choose the subject of what we're working on right now, and it's form-based code and the differences between use-based code and form-based code, and then I hope to spark a bit of a conversation on how we can kind of move forward through here and see which is best practices for us.
And you asked Rich and Kayla to add that to the agenda.
Yeah, oh yeah, we've already done that, and I will be trying to take a very clinical approach to leaving my opinions out of everything at that present moment. I would like at the end to make sure that we have a conversation so we can have people's opinions as well, just not mine.
Do you have a PowerPoint?
Use-based code and what else?
Use-based code and form-based code. There's actually 4 types of code, but we will talk about that next month.
We're gonna learn a lot.
You're gonna learn a lot, because I have learned so much
Are
about
you gonna
zoning.
have a presentation?
I will send one to you. I have a
Okay.
rough draft already, so that way I just wanted to finalize some things today. I'm trying to time myself out. It has to be 20 minutes. So if I hit 15, I will ask, Dan over here to spark some conversation with this so we can fill in that last 5 minutes. Yeah.
Goes to 21, you'll hear from Dan.
So, but other than that, I appreciate the time today and I appreciate the work that we are doing. So thanks.
Thank you. Jay?
So Kristen, thank you for coming down here and doing this. That was awesome.
And it's nice with her living right here. She knows our community. I can make sure to pass that along.
Cause it means a lot. I mean, I do like the idea that they're different communities than us, but that's fine. I mean, she's a professional doing this and you go to the known resource, whether it's like-minded with us or not. So I appreciate that a lot. The discussion was fantastic. Everybody has kind of different knives in their hat, and I'm glad you feel your way. I'm glad you feel your way. And this is great discussion to get me thinking about this process, because how I feel is not always the way that everybody else feels, and I'm glad this space is great for that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, as long as it's constructive, right? It's a great way to resolve it. Okay, Peter?
Well, I'm kinda glad that New Buffalo canceled because it gave us a chance to go in depth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would have been just given the surface, so I think that was useful.
Great. Dan?
Matt, my ADHD kicked in. I didn't mean, I'm pretty blunt,
No.
but there was a couple too many what ifs. That's why I kind of stepped up. She was definitely answering your questions, and I looked at the clock, and we'd been down here 45 minutes, and I didn't know how much we were going to discuss the parking. So I was just kind of nudging the way Dan Bianski nudges. It was very educational, and I do apologize. I will remember, and if anybody would have put in them comments that we had not scheduled this meeting, that would have changed the whole perspective of everything. So don't be scared to speak out, any one of these, on these
I do believe that
emails.
was the question I asked, is why are we not doing it on the day that we already have
Yeah.
scheduled? That was my question.
Right, and that's the first thing, that's what stuck right here.
That was the only
And
thing.
I immediately called Tony, because I had completely forgot that we had canceled it. And the email caught me off guard as much as it caught any of us off guard.
Yeah. It's all right.
And I thought you were gonna be on vacation, that's why we canceled the meeting.
I was,
Well,
I got back last night, so.
He hasn't slept, so.
He has a private jet, he can fly in anytime.
yeah, he's got something private. That's all I got, Ralph.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say, the trail at Shermer, great progress out there, looks beautiful, yeah. And as always, thank you to everyone for being here tonight, and your time and effort. With that, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
Also move.
I'll support.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody gonna oppose? No, motion
Who wants to stay?
Thank you very much, Tony, or Rich, whoever
No, thank you
arranged
guys.
that.
This is a great conversation. This is actually,
Yeah.
push it around. I mean, we wanna have a good debate here before we have Monday nights filled with people at the podium, you know what I mean? So you guys are doing exactly what you're supposed to do.
get it right.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I think you have a very strong opposition to infringing on personal rights. I'm having a tough time with it.
Oh, I know you are.
But I understand the